Iowa's governor signed a law this week that restricts the state's early and election day voting. The changes were quickly passed with only Republican support. State GOP legislators say the rules are needed to guard against voter fraud, even though they noted Iowa has no history of general election issues. They join Florida and Georgia in attempting to put new restrictions on absentee voting after the practice surged during the pandemic. Iowa's new law cuts the early voting period down to 20 days from 29. It comes just 3 years after Republicans reduced that window from 40 days. It will also close voting sites an hour earlier and require mail ballots to be received by Election Day. CBS News reporter Adam Brewster is tracking voting laws across the country and joins me now with more. Hi there, Adam. So I just mentioned some of what the new law does. What are some of the other measures?
Well, I'll pick up a little bit on that last change you mentioned about when absentee ballots are due. Iowa did allow ballots to arrive the Monday after Election Day, as long as they were postmarked the day before. So this tightens the timeline for people to return those absentee ballots. There's a bit shorter of a window for requesting those ballots. It makes it tighter for many voters to get those ballots back into the hands of election officials in order to make sure that they count. There are also rules put in place on who can return absentee ballots in order to curb what Republicans call ballot harvesting, and that's allowing other people to return someone else's absentee ballot. There are rules placed on county auditors and penalties if they do not follow the state's election laws as they are written. We heard Republicans talk about that during the debate over these bills and saying that there were certain county auditors. I think we all know that there are 99 counties in Iowa. We learn that every 4 years. And a handful of auditors Republicans pointed to who did some things on their own in terms of sending out absentee ballot requests. There were legal fights about that before the election. So this puts in some penalties for county auditors if they do not follow the election laws as written. And it is worth noting there has been, a lawsuit already filed challenging some of these provisions that were passed. And we can expect, as some of these changes happen around the country, much like we saw election litigation after November, there may be some litigation to come as these bills are passed and signed into laws by governors in different states.
To be clear, though, Adam, for context here, Iowa has no history of election irregularities. The state had record turnout in 2020 with no signs of problems. So in addition to that, Republicans won the presidency and many competitive races down ballot. So why do this and why now?
Right. Iowa's a good example that this is not just happening in swing states like Georgia that gets a lot of the attention for the changes that are being pushed there. But this was a state that President Trump won easily, a state where Democrats thought they were going to have a decent night, maybe win a Senate seat, hold on to some congressional seats. And Republicans did very, very well all the way down into state legislative races and really had a solid night. You heard from Republicans some of the things you hear around the country. This is about making sure that our state's election procedures are uniform. Shoring up confidence among voters in the elections, improving security, even though, as you mentioned, there was no widespread fraud. Iowa's governor said that this does, put in uniform processes, make sure that there's a standardized election procedures across Iowa's counties. We did hear one Republican legislator say that there are many members in his caucus who believe the election was stolen. Of course, we know that that is not true, but that is something that was brought up, an issue that was raised on the floor of the Iowa Senate. It's worth noting that Iowa state auditor, who's a Democrat and a potential gubernatorial candidate, went after Governor Kim Reynolds for signing this bill, saying she joined the witch hunt against voting. It is certainly an issue that we can expect to see raised during that campaign by the Democrats as they look to try to make some improvements there after what was a tough 2020 in Iowa for them.
Let's turn to Georgia. This afternoon, former President Jimmy Carter accused legislators in his home state of Georgia of trying to restrict access to voting for many Georgians, saying, quote, "The proposed changes appear to be rooted in partisan interests, not in the interests of all Georgia voters." So what's going on here, Adam?
Well, part of this stems from a report that Jimmy Carter issued with James Baker, who served many Republican presidents. He was a White House chief of staff. He served as a cabinet secretary, and they issued a report in 2005 that dealt with shoring up confidence in elections. And one of the findings that they had in 2005 was that absentee ballots, were some of the most prone to potential fraud. And one of the findings that they recommended was not having third parties handle absentee ballots. That's that ballot harvesting measure I talked about just a moment ago. And we've seen Republicans seize on both of those in states. We heard it brought up in the court case last week in Arizona, challenging some of the election laws there in front of the Supreme Court. Republicans were pointed to that finding from the Carter-Baker Commission. And Jimmy Carter came out today and said, also in this statement, this was 16 years ago. 16 years have passed. I now believe mail voting is a secure method. Improvements have been made. And so kind of coming out and saying, let's not look back to this report and take it as the Bible. It was written in a different time, and we've made improvements in our election system. 2005 also happened to be the year that the Republicans passed no excuse absentee voting in Georgia, something that they used heavily in elections and were very successful in elections up until 2020, when Democrats won the presidency and won those 2 Senate seats, in part because Democrats churned out their voters using mail voting during the pandemic.
Well, Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp narrowly defeated Stacey Abrams in 2018, and Abrams went after Kemp, who was then Secretary of State, for purging over 1 million voter registrations. How might restricting access there factor into the next gubernatorial race?
I think we can expect it to be a central issue. Certainly, we know that Republicans are worried about potentially facing Stacey Abrams should she decide to run for governor again. There's been a group formed down in Georgia called Stop Stacey Abrams. It's very clear what that mission is, and we can expect Democrats to raise the issue whatever the bill looks like that comes out of Georgia. The state Senate has passed a bill that I just mentioned that, among other things, gets rid of no excuse absentee voting in the state. The Georgia House passed a different bill that puts some limits on the early voting hours for the larger counties. It does raise some of the hours for many of the smaller, more rural counties. Both bills have some ID requirements. So there will need to be an agreement between the House and the Senate to sort of come together and say, okay, what can pass both of our chambers? It's expected something will pass. We just don't know quite yet what the final form of that will look like. If something does make it to Governor Brian Kemp's desk, he will be under enormous pressure to sign something. And whatever he signs, we can expect Democrats to raise that. Now, Gabriel Sterling from the Georgia Secretary of State's office, a Republican, spoke to NPR recently and said, these Democratic claims of voter suppression, they weren't true in 2018, much like the Republican claims of voter fraud were not true in 2020. So Republicans are expecting this, and that's probably a talking point that we can expect to hear, that this was about shoring up integrity, making sure everyone believes in the process, but you can expect Democrats to probably make this a very central issue in a gubernatorial campaign.
Adam, I also want to ask you about a political legal battle you're following where former President Trump wants the Republican National Committee to stop using his likeness for fundraising. Now, up until a few months ago, they were working together. So what can you tell us about the situation?
The Trump campaign and the RNC had a very successful joint fundraising effort. They raised more than $360 million in 2019 and 2020, just very large sums of money. And so yesterday, the RNC's lawyer responded to what they received from a lawyer for the president that asked, the RNC to stop using the president's name, image, likeness in their fundraising emails. And the RNC said, they use the names of public figures in their emails, and that's a First Amendment issue, and that there was that former President Trump spoke to RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel over the weekend, and there was a understanding that he's okay with the RNC using his name. We saw the RNC send an email this weekend, about protecting President Trump's legacy and donating to support that cause. And the RNC said, certain types of fundraising pitches, they do make sure that they have the president's permission, and they wouldn't do things like that without the president's permission. Now, last night, the president issued a statement urging people to donate to his PAC, Save America, and going to his website to donate to him to back the candidates that he supports. He said, don't give money to rhinos. That's an acronym for Republicans in name only, saying they will not lead our party to greatness. I am the one who you should give money to. We heard him give a similar pitch at CPAC. So we can expect the president to push donating towards his PAC to say, hey, if you like the ideas that I brought into the White House and you want to put candidates in Congress who are supportive of the ideas that we all believed in together, I'm the one who you should be giving money to, and I will make sure that it's spent to back those people.
All right. I have a feeling this is very much to be continued. Adam Brewster for us. Adam, thank you very much.
Thanks, Elaine.